Take a look at this, guys. It's the new Tesla Model 3 Performance Highland facelift. This is without a doubt one of the quickest cars here on Malaysian roads, even including the Ferraris and Lamborghinis. This promises to be much quicker, better handling and a lot more fun to drive than the standard Model 3. And here in Malaysia specifically, it's a performance bargain as well. The question is it worth it to buy the performance over the regular Model 3 variants? And how does it compare against some of its competition, like say the BYD Seal Performance? My full review coming up next. If you're getting a new eco-friendly car, RHB is offering a competitive financing rate starting from as low as 2.10% per annum. On top of that, you'll also enjoy complimentary 210 ringgit charging credits when you apply for RHB Green Financing. First things first, I've already done a review of the regular Highland facelift, so do check that video out for the facelift updates as well as the new features. This new video is focusing specifically on the performance version that you see here. For pricing, the Tesla Model 3 Performance starts from 242,000 ringgit or 243,700 if you are to include the booking fee, delivery fee and even the number plate fee, which are all not included in the so-called official price by Tesla Malaysia. But before I get sidetracked, the price of the car is around 30,000 ringgit more expensive than the long-range all-wheel drive version of the Model 3 and a full 60,000 ringgit more expensive than the base standard range rear-wheel drive. The difference actually got bigger since Tesla Malaysia reduced the prices of the bottom two models. The Performance being the latest version, it has not had its price revised just yet, but knowing Tesla, that's probably gonna happen soon enough. That also makes it around 40,000 ringgit cheaper than a Tesla Model Y Performance, though of course you wouldn't want to buy a Model Y right now with a big facelift coming very soon. As for competitors outside of Tesla, this year is a full 40,000 ringgit more or a full 20% extra compared to the BYD Seal Performance. But then again, this here is far more deserving of the Performance badge than the BYD is. More on that later, of course. But this being a Tesla, all these prices that I mentioned are before options. If you want it in any color other than white, you gotta pay extra for it. The blue or the black like this costs 5,000 ringgit extra, or if you want the premium color options like the Quicksilver or Ultra Red, that's gonna cost you 11,000 ringgit more. If you ask me, that is a ridiculous amount of money for just a simple color change. If you want the interior in white, which looks quite good by the way, that's an extra 5 grand. Or you can quite literally waste your money on other options such as the 16,000 ringgit enhanced Autopilot option, which doesn't really do much at all, or the 32,000 ringgit full self-driving feature, which doesn't even work in Malaysia just yet. Thankfully though, these 20-inch wheels all around is standard on the Model 3 Performance, so that's one thing you don't have to pay extra for at least. Also unique to the Performance is a new front bumper, which is actually the very first time that a high-performance Tesla is getting new styling. Even the ultra-fast Tesla Model S Plaid looks exactly the same as the regular car. So finally, the Model 3 Performance looks slightly sportier and more aggressive than the regular versions. The bumper now has front corner aero slits and a much more prominent lower splitter. You probably can't really see much on this full black color option, but on any other colors, trust me, it looks much better. At the very least, it makes the Model 3 far less generic now. The sportier bumper pairs really well with the new 20-inch alloy wheels that you see here. Now these do have plastic aero covers around them, but I think this works really well. It's one of the better looking Tesla wheels at least. The tires are also a little bit special. These are as standard Pirelli P0 Elect tires, but they run on a specific T2 Tesla compound that promises higher performance as well as lower rolling resistance for better efficiency. Mind you though, these are actually staggered with the rear tires being wider than the front, so you can't actually rotate them front or back, so you will likely have to replace these tires earlier than other Model 3s. This particular car has only done about 5,000 kilometers, but you can clearly see the rear tires are already looking worse for wear. Now, this being a test drive car, of course, is going through a very hard life with everyone wanting to try out its prodigious performance. But this is still the worst I've ever seen a tire look after just 5,000 kilometers. If you're going to be trigger happy with your right foot, be prepared for regular tire changes with this car. At the back, the Performance adds on this carbon fiber lip spoiler and a slightly larger rear diffuser. There's also a new Performance badge, which to me looks a little bit childish, but the worst part of all, it's not even stuck on straight if you compare it against the rear number plate. That looks really off for me. But overall though, with the wider tires as well as the lower ride height by a full 10mm, it does have a much more aggressive stance compared to the regular Tesla Model 3s. That I like. Moving on to the interior, the only things that are unique to this Performance version is this carbon fiber trim up front and these new sport seats. Now the seats are very supportive, they hug you in all the right places, but in terms of comfort, I think I prefer the regular seats on the lower Highland facelift versions. And on this particular car, the driver's seat creaks a little bit in certain positions. That's not very good. The rest of the car though is exactly the same as all other Model 3 variants, which is a bit underwhelming. Take the steering wheel for instance. Usually when you go to a sportier version of the same car, you get a different set of steering wheel, usually chunkier, nicer to hold and so on. But here on the Tesla, it's exactly the same whether you're buying the base model or this top spec Performance. Now, I mean, that's not very exciting now, is it? Even the stitching on the wheel, on the seats, all the same, all black. The one thing that's not black, however, is this headliner over here. This is the one thing that you would expect to be full black on a Performance variant, but here it's all light grey. So yeah, it's baffling how they've come to this decision really. But then again, this is Tesla we're talking about. They are the only ones in the entire industry courageous or brave enough to just completely delete gear selectors, turn signal stalks, and practically all buttons from the entire cabin. You can call that courage or innovative, whatever. To me, I just call it extreme cost cutting. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate from Tesla fanboys on this, but you know what? I don't really care. I'm never going to change my mind on this. Having proper turn signal stalks is a necessity. It's far better than these ridiculous buttons on the steering wheel. And even Euro NCAP agrees with me. Soon enough, having physical controls for your signals, for your wipers are going to be mandatory for any car to get a full 5-star crash safety rating in Europe. This one will fail miserably. And you know what? Even Tesla customers themselves don't really like the way it is right now. I've seen quite a few owners installing aftermarket add-ons to bring back turn signals and gear selectors on their Model 3s. Removing them to begin with is utter madness, I'd say. But having said that, there are still quite a lot of things that I really like about this car. Take this big screen over here. It may have pretty much all the controls dumped into it, but it is still one of the easiest UI that you can get used to among most of its rivals, except perhaps for the silly air conditioning controls. This, yeah, I absolutely hate. But beyond that, it's pretty simple to use. Most of the shortcuts are easy to find and most of the controls are laid out in a very user-friendly manner. Yes, you don't get Apple CarPlay or Android Auto on this car, but here it's not so much of a knock because the Tesla navigation system is actually very good. It is as accurate as using Google Maps or Waze, although of course with no Waze, you won't get any notifications for, you know, hidden cops along the way. You also have full access to music streaming apps like Spotify, Tidal or Apple Music on board, so there's really no reason to miss Apple CarPlay or Android Auto at all in this car. Other than that, you also have a lot of unique features on this car that are not found on most of its rivals. You have an onboard karaoke system, you have a Zoom app to hold meetings while you drive or sitting in the car, you have Netflix, YouTube and so on to keep you occupied while you sit in the car while it's charging perhaps, and it even has multiple games. This includes very simple games or even full-fledged proper PS3, PS4 style games on the main screen. It's brilliant. And then you also have plenty of nonsense features just to please Elon Musk's funny, peculiar sense of humor, like this fart on demand function. What are you, 5? And the voice activation to open the rear charging port is this: open butthole. I can't believe it. One more thing I cannot mention is the lack of a proper 360-degree cameras on this car. Now, this does have cameras all around it, but none that would show a proper bird's eye view like in practically most other cars in Malaysia right now. I mean, they do use the cameras to show a bit of an approximation of your surroundings, but it's not quite as good as the real thing. But one big highlight is the audio system on this updated Model 3 Highland. It's absolutely fantastic. Here, it may not carry any fancy branding like Burmester, Harman Kardon, Bowers & Wilkins and so on, but it sounds brilliant. It sounds way better than anything I've heard from Mercedes-Benz, BMWs and so on. It is outstanding. And lastly, this car may have just a single USB port in the front cabin, but that one port is rated at 65 watts, so you can just charge your laptops and so on without needing an inverter. Moving to the back, it's exactly the same as other Model 3 Highland facelifts except for the missing seat pockets back here. The rear bench is still a little bit too upright but fairly comfortable. You also have decent legroom, limited headroom, and a full glass roof with no sunshade. The floor is also a little bit too high, but this is considered good by EV standards. There's also a center screen for rear passengers. This is where you control your music, volume, air conditioning controls, and even the aircon vents. You can also watch movies or play games on this screen. But as you can see, you'll be leaning forward to press on the screen. You'll be hurting your back in no time. The boot is decently sized at nearly 600 litres, but quite a lot of it is under the boot floor. There is also a frunk at the front with an additional 88 litres of space, far bigger than on Hyundai Ioniq 6 for instance. So, driving the new Tesla Model 3 Performance. The highlight is obviously the performance, because this is, like I said, one of the absolute quickest cars on the road today. Just plant your foot down and the car just... It's insane. It's absolutely mental how fast this car accelerates, and it does so without any drama, without any warning. It literally just jumps forward. It's absolutely insane, and that is exactly what the quickest driving mode is called too. You've got chill, standard, and insane. This, according to Tesla, is still a level or two below ludicrous or plaid, but yeah, it's more than quick enough for anyone in the world really. 0 to 100 is claimed to be done in just 3.1 seconds, and out in the real world I've tested it at about 3.2, 3.3, so it is as quick as it's being advertised at. By the way, you may see the figure 2.9 seconds being marketed, but that is only from 0 to 60 miles per hour. That's about 0 to 96 kilometers per hour. From 0 to 100, it's actually 3.1. Now, there are actually two different versions of the Model 3 Performance. There's the China version, which we are getting, is made in Giga Shanghai, and then there's the ones made in the US as well. The Shanghai version has a slightly smaller battery and lighter as well, 79 kilowatt hours, and this is matched with electric motors rated at 460 horsepower. The US versions, however, has a slightly bigger, heavier battery matched with 510 horsepower. But regardless of the version that you have, they all are rated at the same level of performance, same range, and so on. This is quicker than any car you can think of. You can think of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bugattis, and so on. But the initial reaction, the initial explosion of acceleration is quicker on this car. It doesn't really matter whether you've got 1,000 horsepower in your petrol supercar. When you are cruising along, your car is going to be in the higher gears. So as soon as you plant your foot down, the transmission needs to work first by dropping a couple of gears, and then can the engine rev up and push the car forward. In an electric car, it doesn't have any of those things. There's no turbo lag, there's no transmission to shift down. You press and you jump forward. It's as quick as that. It is insane. So yes, while there may be a few supercars out there claiming 0 to 100 times quicker than 3.1 seconds, out in the real world, out on the roads, this is quicker than any of those things, trust me. The level of performance over here is significantly higher even than the Tesla Model 3 all-wheel drive long-range version. That gets from 0 to 100 in about 4.4 seconds. This feels way quicker. Even compared to the BYD Seal performance, that goes from 0 to 100 in a claimed 3.8 seconds. But you know what? That feels about as quick as Tesla's long range, the 4.4 version. This is in a whole different league altogether. One of the best parts about this car's performance is that it does so without really impacting its range. Now, I've driven this car for around 300 kilometers so far through my regular test routes day in and day out, and I've averaged between 15.8 to 16 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. That, considering this car's explosive performance, is extremely efficient. With the BYD Seal Premium, I only average around 17 to 17.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and even on the far smaller MG4 X-Power, I did around 16.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. For this car to be more efficient than both of those models while being much quicker, that's just amazing. So with an average consumption figure of 16 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, you can work out a theoretical maximum range of this car to be about 480 kilometers on a single charge. This is with the 77 kilowatt hour usable battery capacity, of course. That is very respectable considering the speed, and you know what? I've achieved below 16 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers while testing the performance of this car as well. If you are to drive this car more efficiently, I think you'll have no issues matching this car's claim range of 529 kilometers on the WLTP cycle. But again, it's all relative, because with the Model 3 long range that I've driven before, I managed to average around 13.5 to 14 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So if you want maximum range, if you want ultra efficiency, the long range version is still far better than this one. But now let's talk about handling, because performance in a Tesla, that's pretty much a given. Even the base versions are more than quick enough for most people. So for this performance version to be extremely quick, yeah, that's no big surprise really. But you know what, in terms of handling, this car has me absolutely shocked, because it's actually really good. Coming into this car, I didn't really expect much from it. Having driven the Model Y Performance, that car handled okay, but only by having really stiff suspension. It didn't feel like a cohesive setup at all. And even the pre-facelift Model 3 Performance was the same thing. It was quick in a straight line, but the suspension setup was absolute rubbish. It was just set up really stiff, and it has that, you know, sporty feel that young people like without having any finesse to the ride comfort. This facelift version is a complete game changer. So finally, Tesla is setting up its cars for both ride and handling, and on this particular car, it is superb. Now, because this is a relatively heavy car and it possesses such crazy acceleration, it needs to have a pretty stiff baseline, and it does. So going around town, going through potholes, it does feel a little bit firm, but not overly so. This to me is more than good enough for everyday driving, and if anything, it's already more comfortable than say a Mercedes AMG C63 or the BMW M3. And it does so without having complicated air suspension. But at the same time, this is already more complex than a regular Model 3, because here, this is the first time that the Model 3 is having adaptive suspension rather than the standard passive springs that's in all other models. Here, you can choose between normal and sport modes, and in normal, it's perfectly livable. I think it's fine. It's still a little bit on the stiff side, of course, but considering this is the performance model, I can happily live with that. Now, mind you, it's quite a bit stiffer than a regular Model 3 facelift, but you know what? I think this new Performance in normal mode is more comfortable than the pre-facelift regular versions. In terms of suspension setup, Tesla has come a long way since the beginning of the Model 3. Their rate of development over the last few years is absolutely incredible. If they can keep this up, in 5-10 years, they may make the absolute best vehicles in the entire world. Only time will tell, really. Next, let's talk about handling, because this is a surprise to me as well. Teslas have always been quick, but that's all they were good for, going fast in a straight line. Show it a few corners and it will fumble a little bit. Not this one, however. This has a properly dynamic chassis setup, from the steering wheel to the dampers, and it really can be made to dance around corners. The Model 3 Performance is now a genuinely fun car to drive. The steering wheel plays a big part here. It is incredibly direct, super quick and very pointy, perhaps overly so, but it does give it that go-kart pep and go feel from behind the wheel. Going up and down mountains in this car is a lot of fun. Now, granted, you don't get any feedback from the wheel over here, so you may feel like you're, playing Gran Turismo on a wheel here and there, but with the high sensation of speed, this is still one of the best fun you can have on any electric vehicles in Malaysia, perhaps just bar the Porsche Taycan. In terms of handling, this car is far more deserving of the Performance badge than the BYD Seal Performance. The BYD may be quick in a straight line, and again, nowhere near as quick as this one, of course, but it doesn't really handle. In fact, the Seal Performance rides slightly worse than the Seal Premium without having any real payoff in terms of better handling. It's just stiffer for no reason. The Tesla here has a much better suspension setup. It's more composed. Overall, it feels just far more sophisticated in terms of how it handles bumps, as well as how it handles quick corners. It is superb. One bad thing about the suspension, however, is that with it being lowered slightly by just 10 mm, it is now just a tiny bit too low for you to go through big speed bumps or speed breaker without crawling to a stop. I've bottomed the car out over bumps quite a few times within one weekend. That is not a pleasant experience. The crunch isn't so bad as in quite a few other lowered cars, but it's not something you want to look forward to, really. Next, let's talk about refinement, where it's a bit of a mixed bag. In terms of wind noise, it is extremely good. We're going at about 90 kilometers per hour right now, but even at up to 110, 120, there's hardly any wind noise coming into the cabin. You can thank the all-around double glazed windows for that. But in terms of road noise, in terms of tire noise, it's not great. Now, the tires here are Pirelli P0 UHP tires, and these are really thin rubber band tires with 20-inch wheels at that. So I guess it is expected that it would make quite a bit of a racket inside. This is quite significantly louder than the standard Model 3 versions. I've driven both with the 18s and 19s, and both are far quieter than this one. But then again, measured by the standards of sports sedans, this is still very much acceptable, I would say. Next, let's talk about the Autopilot system, because, well, this is where you would expect the car to excel. I do have quite a few complaints about it. When it works, it's beautiful. It works really well. It controls the steering wheel and the pedals, both accelerator and brakes, very smoothly. It's as if you've got a proper experienced driver taking control of the car. It can even take control over tighter corners on the highways as well, which is very good. But in the rare moments where the car cannot cope with the surroundings, either by the lack of road lines or perhaps a corner is a bit too tight, the way it disengages Autopilot is very abrupt. As you can see, the car just slows down very hard, because when you're driving with Autopilot on, your right foot, of course, will be off the pedal completely. And as soon as Autopilot disengages, with your right foot off the throttle, it will slow down rapidly because of its high brake regenerative system. It also does not help that with a Tesla, you are driving with a single pedal mode by default. There is a way to reduce the intensity of brake regen, but that is only if you're using track mode. If you're driving along in normal modes, it's single pedal mode or nothing at all. Because of this, every time Autopilot disengages, the car just slows down and it's not a pleasant experience at all. So that's Autopilot for you. When it works really well, but there are limitations, and when you hit that, it's really annoying. By the way, Autopilot is standard on all Tesla models. What you have to pay for is enhanced Autopilot, and that only adds on silly little things like auto lane change and in the future a summon feature, but that's probably going to take a long time for it to be legalized here in Malaysia. As for the full 32,000 ringgit full self-driving package, I have no idea why anyone would pay for that when you know it doesn't even work here right now. You can always add that on later, and knowing Tesla, they may even reduce the prices later on. One thing about the Autopilot system though, it is very convincing in telling you that it knows exactly what's going on around the car. The camera system around the vehicle can successfully distinguish between cars, pickup trucks, big buses, motorbikes, and even pedestrians, and everything will be nicely laid out within this display over here. It can even detect if the cars around you are either braking or indicating. It is that good. So there you go, that's my full review of the 2024 Tesla Model 3 Performance Highland facelift here in Malaysia. Now clearly performance is not in question whatsoever. Its acceleration is truly immense. Nothing else comes even close to this thing, nothing in the same price range at least. But what's more surprising, however, is that it's also matched with a pretty good handling package. It's far better than I ever expected from Tesla. As it is, it handles far better, is a lot more fun to drive compared to the BYD Seal Performance. It's not even close, if you ask me. There is a price to pay in terms of comfort, of course, because this does feel a little bit stiff, especially at low speeds, but the payoff in terms of its more dynamic handling to me is well worth paying. Other than that, there's the usual Tesla things that you will either love or hate, but overall, this is still an impressive package. As for whether you should choose this Tesla Model 3 Performance over the long-range version, personally I will still side with the regular long-range. I think it has a better balance between comfort, handling, performance, and range. And while we're at it, if you're not too particular about performance and handling, you may want to take a look at the BYD Seal as well, the non-performance version. If it's me looking for an EV of this size and at this prices, that's probably the one I would choose. Do you agree or disagree with me on this? Do let me know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching, everyone, and stay safe. If you're getting a new eco-friendly car, RHB is offering a competitive financing rate starting from as low as 2.10% per annum. On top of that, you'll also enjoy complimentary 210 ringgit charging credits when you apply for RHB Green Financing.